Welcome to the Word Weaver podcast, a literary place in cyberspace where I share tangible tips, tricks, and words of wisdom to help you achieve your dream of writing a book. I'm your host, Louise Johnson, a writer and the author of Behind the Red Door. Let's dive into today's chapter. Well, welcome back to the Word Weaver podcast. We have Liz Hawk with us today, the author of Homemade, a story of grief, groceries, showing up, and what we make when we make dinner. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's so good to be here, Louise. I tried to find the longest subtitle possible. So
Mine is just as long too. So I even have to read my own off of the book.
That's right. The order of letters. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, this is really cool. It feels very full circle and nostalgic for me because the last time we saw each other was 6 years ago in our nonfiction writing class. And then our books come out 6 years later, kind of a month apart. So I feel very honored that I get to talk to you during your launch period and reconnect. And it's a really cool feeling.
Yeah, no, me too. I was thinking the same. The last time we saw each other, we were giving each other feedback on our proposals.
Yeah. And the wild
in hand.
So I pre-ordered Homemade, devoured it. No food pun intended there. I'm sure you're getting a lot of food puns.
Getting a lot of food puns. Yeah, but I'm enjoying them.
It's too easy. I just rolled off the tongue there. But it was so cool for me. I mean, I cried at the end. It was so emotional. But even reading, was Movable Feast, that chapter, part of the class?
Yes. Yep. So you read exactly. So, essentially after I sold the book, one of the kind of big things that happened in the editing process was what I had written as a collection of essays became this memoir, right? So essentially I had to take a seam ripper to the sides of each of the essays and write it so that it read through. So right. Movable Feasts, you read from the beginning, which starts with Movable Feast, but then also it included what was the kid who I call Wesley's last dinner as well, was how that one, kind of ended. So the chapter that you read had really all of the birthdays and the whole arc of the importance of birthdays. And then in the book, you would have recognized, right, different paragraphs that were put back in chronological order, and then Movable Feasts, which was, maybe 70% of the essay that you read.
That is so cool. I was wondering that because there were other paragraphs where I was like, I remember Leon, I remember this part, but it wasn't in, and I remember that was the title you brought to class, was Movable Feast. So that was really cool for me because it was like deja vu, brought me right back. And so cool 6 years later that it's part of this memoir, which is absolutely incredible. So firstly, huge congratulations.
Thank you.
On the success. It's so exciting. Penguin Random House. Before we kind of go back into the whole publishing process and diving into writing craft, which is my favorite thing to talk about, how does it feel? This was published June 2021, a month ago. How are you feeling post-launch?
Yeah. I feel good. It's such a strange thing. I mean, I think I can't speak for you, as I'm I think I speak for you too. And I say it's such a strange thing to have a story outside your body and in the world, and a story that you've lived with on your computer, then strangers are kind of referencing it it's a thing you've already told them, when it's oh, this is how you know this, which is a peculiarity, I think, to writing memoir.
Yeah, and that's the difference between publishing a novel first and memoir. It is so personal and vulnerable. So people do feel like they kind of know you, even though it was a part of your life a long time ago. And I want to ask this because my sister asked me this, and she goes, when you launch your book, what does success look like or feel like for you? Is it being a New York Times bestseller? Is it selling X number of copies? Or is it just seeing your book on shelf at Barnes & Noble? What for you, did you have an expectation of what a successful launch would be?
Whatever I imagined, it did not involve a pandemic. No, I think my like secret wish for my launch involved appearances at like my friends who lived in different cities' favorite bookstores, and doing like a constellation of tiny things with familiar people in their like favorite book places. So that certainly, hasn't happened. I mean, and who knows, maybe in the paperback version, maybe, maybe it's not totally off the table, but the feeling of kind of launching it into the world and like still being seated like right in my living room
Exactly.
was like
Probably love
not
those
quite what I imagined. Right. Yeah,
things.
exactly.
Yeah, no, exactly. But now, so you're in Boston right now.
Mhm.
Is the world kind of opening up a little bit there? You can go into bookstores and everything.
It is. That's right. So there's not, some bookstores are all bookstores. Well, actually, most bookstores, I would say, are open and are open that you can walk in. There are a couple in small towns or in smaller places that you have to make an appointment still,
Yeah.
but most you can walk into, and clerks are wearing masks, but patrons for the large part are not wearing
Oh,
masks.
wow.
But I haven't seen yet any in-person events at bookstores here yet.
I know. It's such a shame. That's the big thing that we all dream of is
Yeah,
connecting with the readers face to face.
yeah, no, that's right. And it's different state to state. A friend from, I don't know if you're part of are you part of the Binders platforms in
No.
Facebook? Are you on Facebook? I know I'm 100.
No, you're not at all. I am on Facebook.
You are.
I'm not on TikTok or any of those new platforms, so I feel 100.
Yeah, well, but there's a group, there's a whole platform called Binders,
Hmm.
which is for women writers.
Oh,
And there, so there are binders full of memoirists, binders building platforms, binders, all of these different subgroups. I don't even know how many there are at this point. I think I'm in 4. So
cool.
I'll, after this, I'll invite you to see. It's interesting, especially since you like craft, like some people talk craft questions, some people talk about like where to pitch things.
Yep.
Some people have questions, first round through about finding agents or dealing with, kind of legal reads. Um, so that, so there's all kinds, there's all kinds of, kind of questions and answers in this, in a community of writers. But one of the women who I kind of met through Binders Building Platforms, Ashley Renard, launched her book and was posting pictures of an in-person event with Candace Bushnell last week or 2 weeks ago. And it
Oh
was,
my God. That's
yeah,
so, I know in
some
person.
places it felt like very hopeful that like, okay, in some places this is happening again.
Yeah, and it will as the summer goes into fall. Hopefully, do you have plans to do a book tour in the fall, or it's kind of wait and see?
Not yet. It's a little bit wait and see. I mean, I think I will plan to do a few events. I think I'll do a few events. I don't know if it will be like a full-fledged tour, but
Yeah,
I think I will do a few events.
yeah. Doing the digital launch and digital events is definitely. I heard an author friend say she goes, it's you feel very coddled. It's a kind of dipping your toe in the launch, and you get the feedback from Goodreads or your reviews online and everything. So you kind of have an idea of how your book is being perceived, but there's nothing that compares to in person at all.
Ah, well, we'll see, right? Will you do
Yeah.
in-person events, do you think?
Yep, same as you. I mean, I'm supposed to go to New York and do a tour in September.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so doing kind of the whole Elizabeth Arden New York launch
Yeah,
there will be
that's
exciting, but it's a wait and see game. Canada is we're more behind in opening everything up. So for the foreseeable future, it's all digital, which has been, like you said, a unique experience. Not my favorite, but
but I
at
mean,
least we'll look back and say
yeah, exactly.
that was a unique time to launch a debut.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I kind of want to backtrack a little bit to right before, like 6 years ago is when we met. The book you already had as essays. What brought you even to that writing program, that class, and then what has been the journey to publication since then? Was it quick getting a literary agent, going on submission to publishers? What was that like for you?
Sure. Well, I took Christina Thompson's How to Write a Nonfiction class with you, because a friend of mine who had taken it was like, if you're going to write a book, you have to take this class.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I tried twice or I don't know if I tried twice or three times to get in before I like got into the class. So that was also, additional semesters that I was like getting my, essays in order. So by the time I was taking it, um, I thought I had a whole idea of the shape of the book as a whole.
Hmm.
And I think I had maybe 23 essays finished.
Wow.
And then in Christina's class, as you know, but I certainly had no idea about marketing things. I had these essays and sort of the dream that they might be a book.
Yeah.
And then my purpose in taking the class was to figure out like, okay, I need somebody to tell me this is a book. And also how do you make a book?
Yeah. The
How do
nuts and
files on
bolts of
your
it.
computer become a book,
Mhm.
And so over the course of that class, which was a great class,
That was
um,
amazing.
both in terms of content and, and in terms of people and range of projects, right?
I feel so
Um,
honored to have been in it. That's how I
yeah,
look back on it. Yeah.
me too. Me too. I feel the same. Taking Christina's class changed my life. I mean, it really changed my life. It changed my hope for a book into the idea that I had a book,
Hmm.
and left with a query letter, with a proposal, and with a kind of sense of how to find an agent, and and what the next steps would be.
Yeah. It
Um,
took it out of the ether and made it, oh, tangible. I just follow the next step, the next thing to do.
Yep, that's
Hmm.
exactly right. Right. Had a plan. And not only did I
Yeah.
have this kind of, this blueprint for what to do next, also went to Muse in the Marketplace,
Oh, yeah.
yep, in the spring in Boston, which I think is great. I don't know in how many cities similar things exist, but I
Hmm.
can't recommend those highly enough when people ask me like, how do you write a book if you've never written a book? And if you don't have an MFA and didn't go through a program where you have all of these things.
Yeah.
Um, and that was also super useful. I had met with an agent who gave me specific feedback on like what she would be looking for, what she saw as strengths, what she would change about the query,
Ah.
and about the sample that I gave her to read. And so, gosh, so we were in that class almost like a little over exactly 6 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And then that summer, I pitched agents.
Yep.
And then by the end of the summer, I had the 3 agents who were interested in working with me. And so I
Hmm.
had, 3 meetings, and chose an agent. And then it, I mean, it happened very quickly. We worked together on she asked me to send her my proposal. I sent her my proposal. We edited the proposal. And then she was like, I don't want to do too much work on the proposal because depending on which house picks it up, they're going to have a slightly different vision anyway. So
Hmm.
get it out there, hear who's interested and how they imagine it kind of fitting on their bookshelves, and then kind of go from there. And that seemed like a good plan to me because I didn't have another plan.
Right. Yeah. And
Uh,
you trust the expert in that
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Yeah. She's done this before.
That's right. That's right. And for someone who didn't have a platform, she
Oh,
said,
the platform, that
I
word.
the
I hate
platform,
that buzzword so much.
I know, but it's real. The platform, I mean, as you know, I mean, the platform is real.
Hmm.
The platform and the connections. But as someone without a platform, she was like, you're going to need to send. Now, as I'm talking to you, I don't know if I think I sent 3. I don't think I sent 4. I think I sent 3 sample chapters. So along
Yes.
with the proposal, I sent 3 full chapters. And my proposal was a long proposal, as
Hmm.
you maybe remember reading it, that I
Yeah.
did a full page per chapter, because I wanted to. And actually, Christina told me it wasn't my idea. She was like, you want to get as much of your voice in the writing in the proposal. Again,
100%.
as somebody without a platform, and without really a CV of previously published work,
Hmm.
the proposal and the sample chapters were everything that I was sending, was
The
everything.
golden ticket. This is it all. Yeah.
Exactly. That you know, there was no other place they could look for more information on me. So sending it was like, this is what I can do. This is
Yeah.
all I have to show you that I can do, but this is what I can do. And then you know, I got 3 offers. I think I got 3 offers. Like everything has apparently happened in threes. And
Good
then
number.
I was initially acquired by Flatiron, by Colin
Hmm.
Hoffman at Flatiron. And then when he left Flatiron, I remained there with his editor and colleague, Whitney Frick.
Yeah.
And then, and then over time, again, it's a long, everything happened very quickly and then slowly.
That's that's the
I
publishing industry.
publishing, and then also I enrolled in a PhD program that fall.
Right.
And so then going back to school then changed my timeline. And I mean, I think my first contract was like, this is going to be published in 2017, and I was
Oh
like,
my.
2017, yeah. um, so, so in terms of timelines, but then Whit left uh, Flatiron to launch Dial Press with Penguin Random House, or Random
Yep.
House Penguin, and then she took me with her. So eventually,
Cool.
that's my home press. Yeah, is Dial at Random House Penguin.
And then it went through, was it a rigorous editing process with Dial, with your
It,
editor there?
well, so the
Or
first step,
Whitney?
the first step of that editing process um, was writing through everything and then submitting what I had.
Yeah.
So my own kind of editing. Then the feedback that I got from that was essentially okay, you have to take a seam ripper to the sides, because I thought, initially they were like, okay, it has to be, but you have to be able to read through it so that it's not a book of essays. And I edited that so that I thought that you could read through it, and then it was, and he was still kind of like, these are still kind of essays, like, you could still kind of close the book and feel comfortable. He's like, you want your reader to like not feel like they can close the book,
Mm-hmm.
and so then that was then the next round was striking out the repetitions that then, when they were the like reintroducing, and I thought I was doing it in like such a careful way, so that it was like reminding the reader who we were talking about, whatever. It's like, this is repetitive. And it's like, okay.
Okay. Cutting the fat.
Then it's like, right, exactly. How to cut the fat while also like acknowledging that, one of the things about my story is that there are a lot of kids,
Yeah.
so there are a lot of names, there are a lot of characters.
Mm-hmm.
It was a suggestion, at some point, like, oh, would you consider doing some composite characters? And I was like, I don't want to do composite characters because that's part of the story. Like the repetition in some of these kids' lives is part of the story. And part of the story is, kind of making them into individuals too, and part of the story is not having a full story,
Yeah.
so in writing memoir, I found there were some challenges that I wasn't thinking, that the way that I hadn't thought about from an editor's perspective, so I had all of these, and I'm like, no, I can't do backstory because I didn't know the backstory, or
You
I don't
came
want,
in at this time.
yeah, and I didn't want to kind of lead with what I knew at the end about a kid, because then that's not true to like also the feeling of not knowing, I didn't want
Right.
my reader the sense that like, here's the introduction to this kid, like here's everything you need to know about him, because I wanted the like discomfort of like, okay, who's this kid and what are we going to find out and how are we going to find out about it, which was truer to, my experience. So, part of the editing process was that negotiation of like, this is what the reader needs to know. And then, okay, I see the reader needs to know more. When we met, when we were in class, the whole kind of grief component, I think for me was much smaller, or not much smaller. And then,
Yeah.
kind of, suggestion, and then also also story building in terms of like creating myself, like developing myself as a character. And it was like, okay, in order to understand why me in this place, like this is what you have to know, so that whole element didn't exist in my first, in my first in my first writing of this book, in my first idea of this book. And I mean, I would say they were substantial, revisions.
Yeah, well, because they started as essays and you weren't a part of those. You had a kind of a lens from it. And then you had to really, like you said, take it apart, put it back together in a whole new narrative arc which is a really unique and interesting way to write, I think. So I think that's why I love hearing about every author's journey, because it's so different how you get to a finished product or a finished book.
Yeah,
But
and how you kind of make these stories into an object, like, what you do, kind of braiding two different stories, that it's like, okay, how did you write them? Did you write one and then the other and then kind of splice them and
no, so I had a similar structure was my biggest issue too with this book, and I never wanted it to feel cliche of the dual storylines, and I also never wanted my story to be weighted equally with Elizabeth Arden's, because she's lived through 2 world wars, the Great Depression. She's a full life, a narrative arc. And for me, it's a very small part of my life. That was my biggest fear with this book, is that it would feel forced, and like, why am I in there? And am I trying to compare myself to this woman who has an incredible legacy and a whole full life? And it was really hard, but I wrote them. I didn't write them separately. And initially the first drafts, if you had you could have pulled each of our chapters out and they would have been 2 separate books. And that was the biggest issue. So then it evolved with a lot of editing, and it was a dance, honestly, to get it to the point where I was just there to highlight her story and give it a modern lens of, oh, is this still going on today? And give people that little tweak of relatability versus just here's information dumping, here's history. But, oh, let's think, has that evolved for women in the workplace 100 years later? Or has it not? How archaic still are we? And I think we finally got there. I'm sure, I mean, it's never done. I could always critique it, but I'm really happy with eventually how it turned out. And it's not chapter by chapter. I am kind of the tail end of her stories and there to highlight and put her up on a pedestal more than a Julie and Julia braiding of our stories. But it was very challenging to do. And so I commend you for, it's just so hard. And you wrote the book and you wrote the essays the way you thought they should go. And then to have to go back and rethink it, it's hard for the imagination because you wrote it the way you thought it should be.
Well, and it's funny in that sense too, right? Because it was kind of freeing when I realized, like, okay, actually there's not one right way that this book needs to be written,
Yes.
which is like both frustrating and also freeing.
Yeah.
It's like, so this could be a book of essays, but the book of essays then, with me not as a journalist or as a researcher or as a, like, then what is that, and then, and yeah, I mean, I kind of think of it as an accidental memoir. Like, I don't think I thought it was a memoir when we were in our nonfiction book class. Like, I think I felt like it was literary nonfiction, and, and I didn't, I don't think I thought, and that is probably also my own, that was also my own kind of limitation with the familiarity of the genre too,
Right. Or yeah, well, that begs the question. That's really interesting because such a big part of the book is the grief aspect, and it's honestly a tribute to your father and his legacy and your relationship with cooking. And like you said, you became a character in it. So kind of like the act of cooking and the act of writing a book is a very cathartic process. Did you find once it became, you were clear, okay, this is going to be more of a memoir, did that writing fusing in the scenes and the memories with your father and you more as as a big character, did that become a very personal and cathartic experience that you weren't expecting? What was
It,
that like?
it did. I mean, it became very personal, and I did most of my writing in coffee shops. I don't know where you do most of your writing, but I like the background noise. I
Mhm.
like, and again, this is a pre-pandemic world, right? But
Yeah.
like the background noise and the fancy coffee drinks and the just kind of atmosphere in terms of like lights and the sparsity of like not looking at something and being like, I should clean this, or I actually should be doing this,
No distractions.
no distractions. But then it's also so strange to be in a public place doing such a private thing,
Yeah.
And
Crying to
some of
yourself.
right, exactly. Which I was not expecting that part of the that it's like I can't even imagine. I just have to like not think about what what anybody who like happens to look over like must be thinking that I'm like writing this like I don't know like breakup letter or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, and then so then that was like very uncomfortable, which was then also interesting to be like, okay, but I have to like sit here and finish this. So I literally have to like sit in my own tears and like
Yeah.
work through it. So in that sense, there was this kind of, yeah, I mean, there was kind of an organic catharsis, right? To like
That's so cool.
writing the story like out of the body and then like hammering the words into place to be to like make sentences out of it and then
Yeah.
like read it back through sometimes as sentences and then read it back through sometimes like struck by the emotion
Yeah.
and an interesting thing I actually read the audiobook and
Ah.
so which was a whole kind of different so if writing the book was one thing and then marketing the book as like an object is another thing.
Mhm.
Performing the book is
Whoa.
a third kind of animal altogether. And there were and of course I went into it thinking like I wrote this, I don't have to like pre-read the night before
These
like
are my words.
words.
Yeah.
Exactly, they're my words. um that was a mistake, but or something, that I learned the first day that maybe it would have been helpful to, but then I also like didn't want, I wasn't gonna like sit in my apartment and like practice reading aloud,
No, yeah.
you know? And so, so that was, there were, really interesting, kind of learning moments from I had a coach, so it was still, this was in, June, I think it was in May,
Mhm.
that I did this. And so we were kind of open. We were opening to the point of it was fine for me to be in a recording studio, but like the coach was in New York and didn't travel. So then she was like zoomed in,
Oh,
so then I'm
so
like
bizarre.
in this like phone booth size thing with like my book on somebody else's like iPad with this kind of coach saying like stop here, when you ask a question, when you ask a question with concern, your intonation should go down. When you ask with curiosity, it should go up. So for example, there's a part where I'm talking to one of the kids, the kid who I call Frank,
Yeah.
and she's saying, are you okay? And I would say, are you okay?
Yeah.
And she was like, it should be, are you okay? And I was
Down.
down inflection, down inflection for concern, up inflection for curiosity. And and I'm like sitting there like, my whole life, I just up inflection for questions.
Exactly. That's
Like,
what it is.
right?
And the funny thing is she's telling you how to say a quote that you said in real life.
That's
You're like,
so that,
this isn't how I said it. I said it with the up inflection.
yeah, that's exactly right. And she was tremendous. I mean,
Yeah,
she's
yeah, yeah.
a very talented coach, and I feel lucky to have worked with her. And I learned so much about, kind of recording, and like pacing and, all of these different things. But there were these, different pieces where it was like, wait, so have I, like, how are you telling me? Which was a different version, right, of being
Mhm.
edited in writing like memoir in the first person where it's like, maybe you mean this. And it's like, but I mean what I said. And I
Exactly.
and I wrote it how I think it. And then it's like, okay, fine, maybe I need to reconsider how I'm writing what I was thinking, but how do I change the writing without changing the fact of how I was thinking at the time, right? Because
Right.
you're writing true stories,
Yep.
you can't change what happened in the past, but you can change the way you're framing.
Yeah, exactly.
Then
These
it's
little nuances.
Yeah, exactly. So and then it becomes, this kind of meta exercise, right? Where
Yeah.
you're the character and the writer and the editor
And the
and
narrator
the
of
narrator.
That's
Yeah.
so interesting. I'm excited. I'm gonna have to listen to the audiobook and I wanna
No,
hear
you
I'm gonna
do
hear your
not you
pacing.
do not have to listen to the audiobook.
I
And
would.
another thing that's interesting about that is that there were places, I think this is why I started to tell you this, where I um was caught by emotion, like reading out loud, like
Mhm.
these paragraphs that I've read so many times.
Mhm.
I've read them so many times. And I went in like, this is my book, and I like am through this experience, and my crying in coffee shop days are done.
Yep.
And then, and there were places where I just, I was like, okay, I know I can't, I know I'm going to cry. I don't want to cry. I'm just going to pause. And like the sound technician, I can see him like kind of looking away while on the computer while knowing like this, she's like just pausing. And sometimes he'd kind of like look over his shoulder, like, and I'm like, and then it's like, okay, I have to like, at one point he like came in with like 3 bottles of water and was like, if if you swallow, it makes it harder to cry, so that, there are whole parts
Little
where
tricks.
there were like days of 6 bottles of water. But then there are parts where, I've had friends listen to the book, who are like, oh, this part. And it's like, there were places where I could feel my voice fill up and then I would like pause and then restart and do it
Mhm.
what I thought was cleaner. And then in the like producing editing process, I think some of those places, they decided it sounded like better for the story to keep the places with so much emotion, so there's so many kind of levels of like editing, right, of a story.
Right. Oh, that is so interesting to me too. But and it the parts that you're crying, and even after you've read it so many times, is definitely the parts that readers
Yeah,
relate to the most. It's a signal that, okay, I touched on a nerve here. Very relatable, very real, and raw.
I think that's exactly what the coach said. So
Oh,
Louise, this could be your future. Now, are you going to do an audiobook as well?
yes. We're just trying to find somebody for Elizabeth Arden to read her.
Yeah.
Because that's my book is third person and also first person, which
Yeah.
also was one of my concerns with it, that it could be really jarring. But
Yep.
I I couldn't get into Liz's voice. I wasn't her, so it's me telling you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'll have to ask you for tips of the pacing, and I'm
Yep.
gonna remember
I'll
that
send you all of my
trick
notes. Yeah,
of the up for curiosity, down for concern.
exactly. Exactly.
I love it. Well, what do you think it is about food in particular?
Hmm.
The idea of breaking bread, sitting at a table with people. It's so simple. I really like the analogy of cooking and writing are very similar. You start with a few ingredients and by
Mhm.
the end you've created something from nothing. And what do you think that is throughout the book and even throughout your life, cooking in real life, that has you've always come back to, that you find brings people together? Why is it so? I think you said systems fail, but food is revolution, or your dad said that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I think because on some level, part of that is there's so much that you can't fix,
Mhm,
that and in this context, right, to bring it kind of out of the abstract and into the actual,
mhm.
there was so much about these kids' lives that I don't feel like I could make a kind of meaningful big picture kind of difference in all of the systems that are failing them,
Yeah.
healthcare, education, uh, you know, um, social service. I mean, so many different foster care, so many different systems. But I could kind of make a meal once a week, and that small thing, that kind of sharing, that passing, that agency of being able to like pick a thing to make, and then the process of doing it and kind of delivering it and consuming it and
Yeah.
and sharing that space is real.
Yeah.
And that's not it's not life changing, but it's day changing, and it's also necessary and possible.
Mm.
I think there's sometimes it's hard to look at the brokenness of things and feel like, what kind of a change can you make anyway?
Yeah.
And that food, everybody needs to eat,
Hmm.
and that's, it's a starting place, and it's also a kind of world within itself,
Yeah.
the idea of feeding, and I think, like I say in the afterword, I mean, I do think part of educational policy, which, is my academic field,
Hmm.
it is food programs. We've seen that in pandemic more,
Oh,
in a
yeah.
more real way than in many places people were, or people are talking about it more widely now than kind of more generally before. Some
Yeah.
people have always, kind of championed free lunch programs and free breakfast programs
Hmm.
and acknowledged the relationship between fed bodies and successful kids.
Yeah.
In pandemic, like we saw when schools closed,
Yeah.
the most immediate reasons, or one of the most immediate impacts, was a withdrawal of food from kids who counted on schools to provide them food, and so, schools in so many communities figured out ways to kind of deliver meals in some
Mm.
places even before they really realized how to kind of hone, instruction, or
Yeah.
actual schooling, and I think, I think they're not related, I think they're not unrelated, rather.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's true, I think that's true for all of our systems, that
Yeah.
in terms of feeding people and keeping people alive and nourished is part of, is part of, our community responsibility to each other,
I completely agree. It's one of our basic human needs. It's shelter, food.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's what I really loved though about what you could have gone in and nourished and served and prepared the food as the boys wanted you to. Kind of initially, like, can you just come a cooking club where you come in and you cook? But what I loved was just the nuance of, no, we're doing this together, and you could just see the confidence, the self pride that these boys got slowly week after week of it's such a small, it's like making your bed in the morning. It's a quick small task, but you feel so validated. It's a quick daily habit that over time builds that confidence, and I just loved how that slowly came together, and you can see the evolution in the boys. So I really commend you on that and making that part of the cooking club, even when they were fighting against you at the very beginning.
Yeah. Well, because there's this idea, there was also this kind of immediate sense that I knew that many of them were going to be aging out. And all I could think was, if you don't already know how to cook, then who teaches you how to cook? You know,
Yeah,
how do you learn? How
to
do you
feed
learn
yourself.
feed yourself? Right, exactly. And certainly, and none of our meals were very gourmet. And in fact, I think one of my like worst reviews on Goodreads is like, it wasn't even good food that she was making, which is
the
true. It was
the
not
people
elegant
behind their
food.
keyboards, it's like, oh, you're missing the context, the point here.
But it's true. There was nothing elegant. When my mom read it, I gave it to my mom to read, I think 72 hours before my final draft was
Oh,
due.
wow.
And and she said something about the food, and she's like, from what I could read, it was really just a lot of quesadillas. It was a lot of quesadillas.
Who doesn't love a quesadilla?
But, when the book, when I started kind of posting on my, tiny platform of 7 people, one of the kids who, I mean, is now a full grown woman, but who I had babysat for when she was younger, and helped her mom out when her dad died. she messaged and she was like, this is when I said I was like doing this book that, it was before, anybody had kind of read anything
Mhm.
of it. And she like sent me this message on Instagram that was like, you taught, after my dad died, you made us quesadillas and you told me there was something that I should be able to like make for myself that was like quick and easy. And she's like, and I make quesadillas all the time. And every time I do, I think of you in my mom's kitchen being like,
Oh,
if you like what this tastes like, then this is like an easy thing that you could make whenever you want it. And when I got that, I know
I would ball. That is so special.
that is, I've been pushing a quesadilla agenda for a long time.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. If you came in with gourmet Michelin star, really complicated food, no one was going to do that. It's not nothing they want to eat and nothing they would have wanted to prepare. But there's something in food that they enjoy eating. They got to pick the menu, and it's something they actually would make later. It's realistic. Would
Yeah.
you
And
ever come out with a cookbook after?
well, so in my first version of essays, in my first draft, every essay started with a recipe.
Yes.
But then when we talk about, kind of marketing, my agent was kind of like, well, they're not gourmet recipes and you're not really a chef, so then we don't want people to think like this book goes in the cookbook section, so that
Right.
if you want, you could think about, is there one recipe you want to include, or are there two special recipes you want to include.
Right.
And so I kind of broke those down into in some of the chapters, in all of the chapters, tried to use sensory images and some kind of like food choreography, to kind of keep that feel of cooking
Yeah.
without providing what looked like a recipe, like as if this is an exceptional recipe. Because even, in my draft version, I had my cousin's recipe for brownies, which were these like very elegant brownies that, I mean, are delicious. She makes them. I have made them. We never made them at the house. Like the boys were never interested in like our prep brownies.
No, you had an hour to do it.
There's also this story about like taste and comfort. Uh,
Yeah, which I think is really beautiful. There's so many nuances in it. I love it. Well, I'm really curious to know, right now you're in the thick of the marketing, the promotional
mhm.
hat of being a writer, which
Yeah.
people, if you're not a writer, don't really understand. They think the words flow, you sit behind a keyboard and that's your day. It's very romantic, but really you're kind of an entrepreneur as well. So you're in the thick of that. And it's a two-part question. How
Mhm.
do you find that compared to the actual writing? And what is your day-to-day routine when you are writing? Like, even now, are you waking up? Are you writing anything currently? Is it a lot of admin answering emails? When do you take a lunch break? What's your coffee situation in the morning? I want to know it all.
No more coffee shops. Um, the the marketing piece, I am not great at. I wish I learned more about that sooner. I wish I, was thinking more about that sooner. I really kind of, I really kind of wasn't. I think I was like, it's going to come so naturally. Um, it's a very different thing. It's a very different thing to sell a book
Mhm.
than to write a book.
Yeah.
Right now I'm in the process of reaching out to bookstores and asking if they carry it and if they're doing in-person events and are they interested in signed book plates, reaching out to podcasts, like, are you, here's how I think my work connects to like the stories you tell on this podcast.
Mhm.
It's a different kind of, it's a different kind of selling, really.
Yeah.
I would say I'm much better at the writing part than the selling part.
Yeah.
Your Instagram is spectacular. I would love to know how, but
Thank you.
6 years ago, you had a sense of kind of social media, like world
Present.
building. Yeah, exactly, like presence and world building, right, and
Yeah.
representing yourself and your stories, like in the in that space.
And it's funny because now 6 years later, Instagram is kind of becoming a fossil in the social. So I'm aging out of what is popular in terms of branding and everything. But no, I think, but for me, I think the most important part is having a really quality book. You can't market something that isn't a
Yeah.
great, a well-written story. So you have the most important part dialed. That's the key. If anybody listening writing a book, you have to write a really great book.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And
and you
then
can't, and I think you can't, like you said, they're two separate things, and you can't. I don't think you can do them simultaneously. I don't think you can do them simultaneously. I think you focus on writing the book, and
mhm,
then figure out like
the
how to market
marketing.
the book.
But it's good to think about. I think a lot of people also think once you sign with a big five publisher like Penguin, that there's a whole team there who is going to help you forever to promote and market this book. And that just isn't the case. They don't have the bodies, they don't have the staff to give you that much attention. You might have a 3-week blitz or campaign, they help you. And then the onus is really on the author to continue to shout from the rooftops about their work. So I think there people just assume, oh, because you have an in-house publicist or something, but really we're the ones also reaching out to the bookstores, trying to get on the podcasts, being our own advocates.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
great. I mean, I feel very grateful for, for my team, and I certainly, do have a team, and, and right. And it's also important, one of actually Christina Thompson was just saying the other day, you're no one can sell your book like you can sell your book. You
Yeah.
have to be your own best advocate.
Yeah. And that's with the Instagram piece. Sometimes I feel a little icky about the self promotion of it and the kind of stylized branding of it and the colors. But I read somewhere that it takes 7 times for people to see something for them to act on it. So if they see the cover set, it's on the 7th or 8th time, they will actually purchase it. But
Yeah.
I always strike the balance of wanting to be my authentic self, but people don't really care about my personal life. Now they just want to care about how do you write a book, writing tips, all of that kind of thing, which is great. So now I'm shifting into it's a fine line of being authentic and sharing. So there's a person behind the brand, but then also being informational and giving people what they actually want. So I'm always struggling. So I'm happy you think it looks great because
Yeah.
behind the scenes, I'm
Oh
always
my
second guessing myself.
And how many followers do you have? You have an insane number of followers.
11,000
I
now.
mean,
But that's still a small platform in the publishing world, which is
I
funny.
mean,
Yeah.
I I think I have like 432. So 11,000 is
Oh,
pretty tremendous.
I don't know if all of them are buying books though. Yeah, exactly. But then what is your day-to-day writing routine look like, or when you were writing, what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So I would say I consider reading and walking part of my writing process. If I'm kind
Me
of
too.
thinking about something and working through it. Um, I like to kind of have an idea in mind before I go for a long walk, and then kind of pull it apart and like, do that kind of ordering, and then come back and sit down and kind of, write through what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I like to write in the morning.
Okay.
um and I mean, and also the afternoon. I always tell myself I'm going to write at night, and I don't usually write at night. Sometimes, I mean, occasionally in the summer or something, but that's really not my usual writing time.
Yeah.
Um,
And then are you an outliner? Do you sit down with research notes or you have cue cards taped to the wall or how do you?
yeah, so I have a lot of index cards.
Yeah.
So when I was doing chapters, I mean, yeah, I mean, when I was doing chapters, I should have, like, do I have them in a place I could reach? But I have stacks and stacks of different, kind of index cards that I would then kind of move around when I was figuring
Mhm.
out the order of chapters, like with key things or with the kids' names, so that then it was like, okay, where's the balance, with
Mhm.
the idea of kind of, up chapters and down chapters, and then also the kind of chronology. And I like I like the I like the I like
Physicality.
the physicality. I like being able to kind of write it out, and then
Yep.
I like being able to move it around.
Same.
But I don't have, and people are like, "Oh, I'm horrified to tell you have Scrivener, but I did not write this book using Scrivener. Maybe my whole life would be, maybe I would have been on a 4-year, editing track instead of a 6-year editing track if I had Scrivener. I don't know. But instead of my like stacks of index cards, I think I have, I bet I have 9 binders of the book printed out, with
Oh,
with post-it notes, with color coded post-it notes, with editing,
yeah,
in different like brightly colored binders. So again, I like the like physical, so I,
it's
you know
tangible.
Target, right, exactly, and pick the most beautiful, like big binders that I was like, okay, this is something I can live with for the next month and a half,
It won't
and
be an eyesore.
and have, and also like to kind of feel the physicality, of the like book. And then I have these, and I have maps. I have a couple of different, at a couple different periods, I made like big maps of the story. And so that I could see the layout, of the book. Um, Now my next project will be my dissertation project. And I'm in the research stage, not the, not the writing stage yet. Or
Yeah.
I have written 3 articles, that I think will be, kind of part of the story. So I do have like paper drafts and,
Hmm.
kind of folders, and I haven't figured out my organization system for that yet. Book wise, I'm trying to do a couple of companion essays, that I'm thinking going into
Oh,
the
cool.
holiday season.
Smart.
So that's the writing, those are the things that I'm working on, writing wise now.
More instant gratification doing articles like that than, well, not your dissertation. That is a marathon as well.
Yeah, no, the dissertation will be a marathon. The one of the articles that I think will, I'm not sure when it will be up, or one of the essays rather, is a chapter that was cut from the book that then, was
Ah,
one of the ones that I was like, okay, fine, I'll cut it, but I'm gonna come back to it later. And so then kind of brought that out of the,
the
I never,
trash.
I was gonna say trash, Louise, but I never put it in the trash bin. Exactly.
Exactly. I call it the word graveyard, and then I always go back to
Yeah,
that folder. So it's still there.
that's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
you didn't kill your darlings. You
I was just
just
gonna say you could do a whole podcast on killing your darlings and what that really means,
yeah.
um, right? In terms of like what's too precious, and how do you, do this like fierce justification, like these are all of the reasons that this can't be just discarded. And it's like, okay, well, if I'd answered all of those questions in the beginning, then probably it wouldn't have been discarded. But
No,
also,
exactly.
then it becomes a different thing,
Hmm.
so then the, what was a chapter in a bigger story, then, how do you make it into a
It
standalone?
has a second life, which I really love. That
Yeah.
recycling, I guess, is the word. How many
Yeah.
more years of your PhD do you have? Is that a
Well,
big question? That's a bit of a question.
I'm hoping to write most of it next year. Mhm.
Okay, amazing. So that's
I'm
your focus. No, you don't have a book on the horizon
no,
beyond that.
so that my dissertation will be, I'm hoping to publish that as a trade book.
Oh, cool. Oh my gosh. So that is your short-term, long-term vision for now.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
do you want to be a career author beyond that? Go back to teaching? What is your dream? Or maybe that's too lofty. I mean, we learned with COVID that you can plan and then God laughs.
Yeah. Well, I plan to keep writing,
Hmm.
and
Please do for all of us.
thank you. That's very kind. And certainly I feel the same way.
Oh,
The community of writers has been is really such a, important discovery in this process, I would
oh,
say. Um,
it's
you know,
everything. Yeah,
yeah,
writing it's lonely business. So to find people who
yeah,
understand and get it is really something I wasn't anticipating because I am very introverted but I need it.
yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I totally agree. I was, helping one of my sisters. I don't have any kids of my own, and both of my sisters have kids. And I was helping one of my sister's kids during Zoom with, some of his writing stuff, because his, class had like very regimented, assignments. And my sister was like, I can't really do Teddy's writing assignments. Can you help Teddy and Abby with their writing? And, so one of the, so he had to like write a story one week, one Friday, then the next Friday he had to revise it. And so we're sitting there and he's like, I already did it. And I was like, I know, but what revision means is that, you're looking at a thing that you already have. That's a good thing. And you think about, how can I make this better? And he like read through the whole thing intently. And he was like, I think it's already good. I was like, Teddy, let me tell you a story.
Yeah. Let me tell you multiple stories.
I was like, you know how long I've been revising my book? And he was like, no. And I was like, I think I revised, I think I've done, I'm trying to think of the number, Ted. I was like, but I think I've been revising it for 5 years. And he was like, what? I was like, this is why they're, kind of teaching, he's horrified that he's got to change 3 sentences around,
He goes, I already wrote amazing. I love his confidence.
And it's true. No, I totally relate, like,
yeah.
Editing? Like, did you think I needed editing?
Yeah. And this is a beautiful writing. What do you mean?
Right. And then he like, changed to like, and for like a comma. And I was like, okay, we're going to have to, let's think of another thing.
Those are cosmetic little copy edit changes. Right. We got to go more developmental here.
Right. Exactly. But it's funny, right? At every level, the idea.
It makes me happy to hear that they're teaching that though.
Exactly.
I don't think I got taught that in English class.
Yeah. I mean, I think he was in 3rd grade, and I was like, this is really great. And he's like, I already did it already. And it's like, you're going to be thanking your teachers when you're in high school.
Yeah.
And you don't feel like you can, and your teachers are going to be thanking your teachers when you don't turn in a first draft as a final thing.
Exactly. Oh, that's awesome though. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, I guess kind of the last thing, because there are a lot of people who listen to this podcast are writers, have book ideas, but don't know where to start. So what is your advice of just how to start? If you are, you want to write a book, what is the next step in the process? For both you and I, planning and having that blueprint has been really helpful. So what would you say?
Yeah. Well, I think my first piece of advice would be that I think a lot of people think that publishing happens to you, and I would say if you're not a celebrity, or, some kind of big CEO, like nobody's knocking on your door asking for your book. Like you have to make it happen. Right. So then once you know that you want to do it and that you have to make it happen, then you have to locating the story, I think, is the most important part. And you were saying this before, and I know you've said this before, and focusing on the story that you're telling. I do think that reading is part of writing, find books you love and reread books you love to kind of think about why you love them as books, and kind of look at books in an instrumental way, like what's the shape of them, right? That gives you a different sense of how to take your own writing to the next level and how to kind of think about storytelling, right? And what is successful. And keep writing, I think in the beginning, those are the things. Find your story, read other people's stories that you love, fall in love with stories, and really look at books like products and try to figure out how you can craft the same thing, the same as like if you were looking at a really beautiful cake, to bring us back to like a food, kind of metaphor.
Love it.
Like you would think like, oh, like, could I make that myself? Like, how would I make that myself? I think that, that is part of the process. It's not I mean, writing is organic, making, putting sentences together, but in terms of the shaping, that doesn't just come. It's a craft that we have to hone, by borrowing from each other, by consulting, by, revising and sharing, and certainly reading, and continuing to write, I mean, it's, like you said, it's lonely, and it can be tedious, and it's sometimes not great,
Yeah.
And the way through it is through it, is like to kind of keep writing, write favorite sentences, write, kind of ideas. Don't worry about, I mean, and I say this like a thing that I don't always do, is like spend so much time on one paragraph and then keep scrolling back up to the top of it to reread that paragraph, right? And be like, oh, this is going to be a great thing, or getting stuck and then going back to like your favorite part to just kind of keep like reread that part. Just
there's a good nugget in there.
Remember, right? Exactly. Which that's important too, in terms of like a touch point. But I don't have any fitness metaphors, but I'm sure there are some, give some fitness, metaphors for like building those muscles, right? And like kind of, like it's an endurance sport. I would say writing is an endurance sport more than anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's discipline. It's sitting there even if you don't want to write. And it's pretty simple, just doing the thing, but we get so scared of the blank page and fear of failure, and we get so caught up in all these other things, but it's really just coming back. I think it's Neil Gaiman. He says for his writing sessions, he can either do two things. He can stare at the wall or he can write. And eventually staring at the wall gets to be pretty boring. So writing seems to be the more enjoyable alternative. And that's what it is. There were so many distractions in the world. There's always going to be a dinner party that you want to go to, or you want to scroll on Facebook for hours. There's something always going to be pulling at your attention that you want to do more maybe than sitting in a room and writing. But that's what it takes. It's the action of doing it.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, along those lines, I think Pat Conroy said, in a kind of writing talk, people always ask me how to be a better writer, and I tell them bum glue.
I haven't heard that one. I like that.
It's a little bit less, floral, but it's also true. I mean, I think about that a lot. Like I think about that when I'm doing, kind of whatever work, that it's like, okay, like think about the bum glue, like you just have to like sit here and sit in it, in order to make it happen. It's not, I think the first sentence, I don't know who said, the first sentence falls from the ceiling, and the rest of it you have to work at.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. I'm going to remember bum glue from here on out. That is my new favorite thing. I love that. That's so memorable. It's things like that just stick with you. Oh, not trying to be punny there, but sticks with you.
No, it's true.
Yeah. Well, where can everyone find you and purchase a copy of Homemade? Now that you have this big platform, everyone can find you online everywhere.
Yeah, that's right. My Homemade is available wherever books are sold, including the Penguin Random House website, or Bookshop, or Amazon, or Target, or Barnes & Noble. And I do have a website, lizfrancishauck.com, and you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Liz Hauck Writes.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. I really loved catching up with you and chatting about your first book. Congratulations.
And to you, Louise, we did it. You have to hold it yours too.
Oh, mine's behind here. Yeah.
There it is. There's the pink. Yeah.
We did it.
Yay. We did it.
6 years later.